all the speakers will speak first. We'll have the same format as before, where I'll kind of respond a little bit, and then we'll kind of open it to questions. So our next speaker is Matt Lindsey. Matt is a data scientist in public health care in the United States, who's volunteered with 84,000 working on AI-related projects such as neural machine translations and other topics in data science and computational linguistics. So he's recently piloted a very interesting project with 84,000 that maybe we can hear more about. The title of his talk is Navigating Buddhist Paths and Computer Algorithms, AI's Role in Dharma. So please join us in welcoming Matt. So you'll switch slide there and then on this one. I'm sorry, say that. You'll switch slides using this button or by just clicking here. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Matt Lindsey, and I'm a data scientist in New Mexico. I'm going to be throwing around a lot of jargon today and acronyms, and I did do the kindness in my paper of providing a glossary at the end with some examples, and so there's a place to reference some of the things we'll be talking about. Even the title data scientist might be new to many of you. I'm going to go ahead and put a clock on too, so I'm keeping track of my own time. I can lose track here. So data scientists have a few skill sets. One of them is programming. And so I do a lot of programming in my job, particularly in Python. And there's a lot of math involved, particularly statistics. And we do research. And so what's interesting about healthcare, starting to use AI, is that we work in one of the poorest states. I say wife, my wife's here, and she's also at UNM Hospital. And we're always at about 30%, 130% capacity. And so that means that of the 100% bed capacity we have, we're 30% on top of that. So patients are out in the hallway, ED patients are in the waiting room, and our administration is desperate to get patients through so they can get served. We're not going to get more money in a state like New Mexico. It's one of the poorest relatively in the union. So how do we do that? Well, we can use our data smarter. And so a lot of the algorithms that I use at work are the same ones that we use, say, in neural machine translation. And there are differences, particularly in the data sets, but it's surprisingly similar in the approach, a lot of the models. So I'll go ahead and get started here. I'm new to the RYI community, and so I did have to do some of my own research. And one of the things I read is that students here study among many people, but the names I recognize were Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, and Tsongkhapa. And so I thought it would be appropriate to get a quote. Is it a little too loud? I was told to stand very close. I'll stand a little bit farther back. How's that? Is that better? Good. I'll do that. And so I picked my favorite quote for my favorite sadhana, and that is Lama Chopa. And there's a wonderful quote here. It says, "I seek your blessings." We're speaking to the guru or lama here in this. It's a form of guru yoga, this particular sadhana of Jay Tsongkhapa. It says, "I seek your blessing to realize the meaning of Nagarjuna's intention, that there is no contradiction, but only harmony between the absence, even an atom of inherent existence in samsara nirvana, and the non-deceptive dependent relationship of cause and effect." And why I thought this was relevant to our discussion is it seems that this AI has just arisen out of emptiness. And it's kind of scary. You know, it just seems like it's appeared out of nowhere. And it, just like as the line says, that, well, emptiness and karma, cause and effect, are very closely related. So I think we all have to admit or acknowledge that it is both our individual and collective karma to have to deal with AI. And so I'm coming to you today as maybe an ambassador of these tools to encourage you to use them with caution, because as soon as we encounter a new phenomena, we then have to discriminate what we're seeing, make intention as to what we're going to do next, and then act. And we've thus created new karma, throwing karma. And that's what we're going to be doing with AI, whether we fight against it or embrace it. And so I thought it was relevant to kind of look at it from that perspective. And so I was talking to my friend, a colleague at work, she has the same job that I have, about what I was going to be talking about. And she kind of was looking at me. I could tell she wasn't really tracking what I was saying. And then she had something that resembled an epiphany. She said, "Oh, the printing press was just invented, metaphorically speaking. Like, this is as big, if not bigger, than the inventions of the printing press. And in the days that the printing press was starting, I'm sure people heard about it, didn't really know how it impacts society. They maybe thought, I'm going to stick with the old way. I'll do handwriting. Thank you very much." Maybe some people were zealots and embraced it wholeheartedly. But either way, we all can agree now that the printing press has had a tremendous impact on our society. And I think when we look at AI as a tool that it's there in people's toolboxes, they can use it for harm, they can use it for good. But either way, it's here. And it's a very powerful tool that we'll need to reckon with. I don't even think we know exactly what it does yet. I mean, we know these current models or current iterations, but long term, where will it be in 500 years? I think that's an important thing. So I think my hope here in speaking to you is to help you be a better informed consumer, so that when you engage with it, you can ask questions that inform its use. If you're talking to developers, that you want certain tools, certain things implemented into the algorithm. And so I'm going to be basically covering a few models, a few types of AI, and then some technical limitations and some ethical considerations. I think one thing I wanted to point out here is that, and I think I've kind of already iterated it, is that I think it's inevitable. And I think like the image, like I think we're thinking that we can avoid it. And in many ways that we could probably individually not really engage with it. Maybe we don't want to use chat. We don't want to use neural machine translation. But I still think it's important that we, as a Buddhist community, understand the tools and how they can possibly be used and how people will be using them. I think it's important to start with some historical context. Like, I don't know exactly when the printing press was made or invented. I'm sure there's a specific date, but I also think that date could be challenged. I'm sure it was many different innovations that took place over time, and the actual date is somewhat arbitrary. I think with AI, we can look at it the same way. I think like one of the things that's really driven the AI revolution are things called graphic processing units. And unlike most of our computers that we're all using have central processing units, CPUs, but graphics processing units were made for the video gaming industry. And they are tailored for very specific needs, and they can do things very well, particularly in AI, because you can give many graphic processing units the ability to handle tasks. They can share those tasks and run them in parallel, and the data can be consolidated at the end of an epoch, and it can be revised. But by having multiple GPUs going on, it's made it possible for us to do some of the models that we couldn't do previously. Like when we look at data science, for example, many of the models have been around for over 100 years. We've been using statistical models for all sorts of things. So what's really changed is our ability to handle computational demands that we couldn't with just simple CPUs. And that started back in 99, I think was the first one that I read about. The other one that was really interesting, I'm actually going to do kind of a deep dive into Word2Vec here in a few minutes. That is a word embedding matrix. Some of the jargon I'm throwing at you, again, it's going to be defined in the glossary. And that was 2013. And then a more sophisticated form, very similar to what we're using now if you use chat or Claude, is one of the first iterations of a dynamic word embedding model is BERT. The other thing that I think is really fascinating, and I think this is the moment that I think really changed things. There's someone by the name of Ilyas Esquiver, and he's been in the news recently as being one of the board members of OpenAI. And what's interesting about him is he authored, when he was in with Google Brain back in, I think it was 2014, the first sequence-to-sequence model. And what that model did, and it's radical, might sound kind of boring when I mention it, but if you take language And a sentence that's said in one language, let's say it's 7 sentences. To say it in another language might be 5. I'm sorry, if it's 7 words, to say it in another language might be 5 words, might be 11 words. And that was really problematic for computational translations. And so what the sequence to sequence model did that he came up with in his team is that the number of inputs on the, let's say the original language can be different than the number of outputs in the translation. And that sounds simple, but that was, so neural machine translation, in my opinion, was born there. And neural machine translation was, I think, the predecessor to large language models. And so the next thing what we're going to be looking at is, if this is kind of the history of a few major turning points of how we got to the ability to do AI, what are some of the big ones here in the Buddhist community that we can't avoid? And of the many, there are many in machine learning models for prediction, et cetera, time sequence series, all those. I'm not going to get into those, but I think the 3 versions of AI that I think are very pertinent to this community and to the Buddhist community at large is neural machine translation, large language models, and RAGs, or retrieval augmented generation. So I'm going to dive a little bit into each of those. Okay. So I'm going to get kind of geeky here and get some math going on, but I really think the static word embedding matrix is something that I said was a precursor to the dynamic word embedding matrix. Sounds kind of boring, but I think it's the dynamic word embedding matrix is the one thing in the math and the computer science that's the same in all natural language processing AI. And so let me give you an idea of how a static word embedding matrix is made. There's a few of them. There's GloVe and Word2Vec. So let's imagine that we took all of the publicly available novels that are available, and we downloaded all of those as raw text. Or conversely, we went and downloaded a huge repository of newspaper articles in English. Or we went to Wikipedia and downloaded all of Wikipedia. Any one of those are all together. And from that, we got rid of the punctuation, we got rid of the capitalization, and we got rid of unusual words, misspelled words, and we listed them out. So you're talking a lot of words all listed out. And we cross-referenced that with another list of those same words. We now have a gigantic matrix, and it's called, and at this point, they're just words. And then what we start to do is we're saying, okay, we're going to figure out the probability. And so let me kind of give it a concept here. So let's take any of those sentences in these publicly available books, like Huckleberry Finn. Let's start with Huckleberry Finn. So we take sentences from Huckleberry Finn, and we start counting out words. So let's say we take 5 words, and then there's a 6th word. And after that 6th word, there's 5 more words. We start to look at what is the probability. Let's say that 6th word is cat. What is the probability that that word is cat, right? And then we, based on the 5 words over here and the 5 words over here, we don't know at first, so we guess. We're just going to throw random numbers in there. You literally throw random numbers in all of it. And then you're like, was I right? Was I wrong? Well, if you guessed, you're going to be wrong, right? And you keep doing that process. And that's that training that model. And eventually, what you're going to get through about a semester of calculus using partial derivatives, and you're about a semester of linear algebra, a couple semesters of statistics, you're going to be able to predict with very high certainty what that 6th word is, no matter where you are in that matrix. And so it's like, who cares? That seems like a rather academic task that doesn't have much function. But what's fascinating about that, when you're done, these words exist. They're no longer words in the way we think of them. They're just numbers. So the word the might be 5. The word cat might be 32. It's totally arbitrary, right? And so these numbers, though, exist in a vector space. And I know it's kind of abstract here, but just think about back when you're in Algebra 1, you had a line with a little arrow here, and it went from the origin, and it went to this word cat. And there's a slightly different one that went to the word king or whatever, right? Okay, so that essentially is the word embedding matrix. It doesn't exist in 2 dimensions. It exists in a very high level of dimensionality, but you can start to do really interesting things with that. And I have it up here. If you see the advantages, it says that it can capture the general relationships between words. So in other words, if you look at it physically, the word king and queen are very close to each other. And the word man and woman are very close to each other. They're just sitting there. Think about the arrows. They're just words that sit in space together. And so let me show you the example here. Okay. So the way you test if you built your static word embedding matrix correctly is you give it GRE analogy. Oh, GRE is the graduate exam, right? If you give it analogies and it can solve analogies, you've done a good job at making a static word embedding matrix. But here's how you test that. You literally can type in the word king minus man. So in that vector space of where a king exists, and you move in the direction of man in that vector space, and you reintroduce gender, but this time in the word, in the term of the word female, it's now, it should be very close to the word queen if you did your math right. And that seems like, is that just a parlor trick? It is in some ways, but really what it's done is it's vectorized semantics. And from that, you got to think this is the old fashioned one. This is the static word embedding matrix. And so another one might be fun, like Buddha minus teacher plus student is a disciple. It would know that. And it would know that just by moving around geometrically, doing these things called cosine distances between word spaces. And that was the beginning in 2013, a year before Elias Esquiver did his article that started to make this stuff really start to happen. But again, we don't use static word embedding matrices in any of these natural language processing AI models. We use something called dynamic word embedding matrices. And what those do is it can approach language from any direction. So they're bidirectional. And so where with a static word embedding matrix, it's not going to know the difference between a riverbank and a financial bank. A static word embedding matrix won't. This though, and this is what Chat's using. Chat's not using BERT, but Chat, Claude, all of these big, large language models that Adam was referencing, they can now differentiate between a riverbank and a financial bank based on incredibly huge context windows of words. And what's fascinating about it, and I'm kind of jumping ahead here, maybe I won't get too far ahead of myself here. I'll come back to that one. Let's talk about neural machine translation. Let me see how I'm doing on time. 15 minutes? Yep, good. Okay, so what I'm going to do in this next part is I'm going to talk about what natural language, neural machine translation, large language models, and RAGs are. And then I'm going to go into some technical limitations because this technology is by no means perfected. It's crude in many ways. And then I'm going to talk about some ethical considerations from a Buddhist perspective. And I'm going to go back to some of the ideas I was talking about with the bird. So one of the things that I put in the repo, and you see here's some of my Python code. The kind people at 84,000, they let all of their sentence pairs, these translation memory exchange files, they're basically a Tibetan sentence and an English sentence. Right now, there's about 350,000 of them. They're open to the public. So I went ahead, and it's in the repository if you want to see. There's a fully built neural machine translation project from setting up the data samples to the, and that's what you're looking at here is when we split, like, 80% of this is going to be for training, 10% validation, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, what we're doing here is we're using that dynamic word embedding matrix, and we're going through iterations and trying to predict from this Tibetan original sentence an English output, or you could do it in any language you want. And so it captures meaning, it produces some good translations. I'm skeptical here. I'm going to go into some more criticism of neural machine translation, but I just want to give you a general idea of what it is. Okay, so here's from Google, like, how do you know if you've made a good translation? And this metric is not a great tool, but it's kind of one of the most prominent tools we have. It's called a BLUE score, bilingual evaluation understudy. And as you get closer to green on that scale, you start to get really precise duplication or replication of the words. It doesn't mean that all the semantic meaning was captured, but it's pretty darn close in terms of what words were used, right? So when I went ahead and did that model, And I wish you could see this. I'm going to go ahead and take out my pointer here because it's relevant. This article is from Gouda and May, and they published this article in 2020. And their focus in this article was how many unique words do you need or can you use depending on how many resources you have? So remember I said that 84,000 had at the time 250,000 sentence pairs. Right now it's about 350,000. That's considered a very low resource project. I mean, like 350,000 is a data set. You really can't even hardly call it a data set. It's so small. However, this one here, and the low resource is right here. I don't know if that is visible. And so you start to get blue scores in the teens. And so up here, though, this was a high resource project. It was to German and English back and forth. They were getting around 40. Okay, so much better. So once you get up to around 4.5 million to get a blue score is 40. It was interesting, though, when I use 84,000 sentence pairs, I got a 27.89, basically like 28, 29. The open neural machine translation community that I was communicating with, they couldn't believe I did such a good job, or I shouldn't say that, the model did such a good job. However, I was thinking here, like, but would you call that the word of Buddha? I would not call that the word of Buddha, but it was fascinating with the low resource repository of data. It could produce something that good, right? And so, but I think what was kind of concerning to me is even in a resource of 4.5 million, like you got to think that was around 40 coming back here. That's just now starting to get in the green, and they call it understandable to good translations. Maybe that's fine for signs, for a newspaper article. But again, when we're talking something as sacred as Buddha's word, I don't know if I would use that. Large language models, I'm not going to get too far into that because I think many of you know how to do that. I have some other couple of points, but that's something that Adam had talked about, and that's what we're seeing in ChatGPT. All right. Retrieval augmented generation, I'm going to spend about 1 minute on that, and I'm going to go here to a picture. The cubes here, if you think of this large cube as being ChatGPT, what you can do with RAGs is you could take a bunch of scholarly work. Let's say that you had translations from a particular lama, okay? And you wanted to ask questions of that lama's teachings and what pages is in citations. What you could do is build a RAG. And what a RAG does is you basically put your resources, so these lamas' texts, let's say in English, next to the large language model, just like that small Q would represent the lama's text, the large Q chat. And you could ask scholarly questions. Where is this referenced? Or how many times, not how many times, but like, give me all the places where this topic is discussed and give me the folio number. Like, and a RAG could do that very well. Like for the scholarly purposes, that's ideal. I want to move into some ethical considerations for the last few minutes. These are the most concerning to me. So in my repository, I gave you an OCR, some code that I worked on with someone from Google. And what that can do is it can take an image of Tibetan text. And it's amazing. It's like 60 lines of code. Like this isn't my code. This is just like recycled code that people share. So in like 60 lines of code, 50 lines of code, you can take an image that has Tibetan text and it'll turn into Unicode Tibetan text. So that's in the repository. The other thing I gave you is that entire neural machine translation using the 84,000. But when we started to get the large language models and to RAGs, as someone who's taken, like has had highest yoga tantra empowerments or taken the bodhisattva vows, I am loath to have any sort of thing that answers questions that generates language about those, because it will answer questions about emptiness and it might be wrong. And so what damage could I do to that person's spiritual practice if they're now getting emptiness teachings from a machine that hasn't presented it authentically? Like I've broken my bodhisattva vows. I think there's 2 places where that shows up. The secret mantra vows, that's far more detrimental. There's one of the root downfalls is revealing the secrets of secret mantra to people. And so if I were just to take the entire Kangyur and Tangyur, the 29 million pages that are available with BDRC and built a large language model of that, and you could access, and that was my doing, like I would be breaking my secret mantra or highest yoga tantra vows. And so I think we need to like think about these things as we're building these tools. The other thing, at least in the tradition that I was taught in, is that many answers to spiritual questions will have a different answer, whether you're asking a question about from the perspective of sutra or tantra. I just wrote a beautiful article on the transference of consciousness from the sutra perspective and the transference of conscience from the tantric perspective. And so the coding that would need to go into that so that the user would be presented with both, like if they ask questions about transference of consciousness for people like they're about to die, like that's a lot of responsibility. So even though these are not difficult to build for someone who's a coder, I don't know if I have the wisdom or insight to build into the algorithm all of these complexities. And so it's kind of leaving me with the question of like, yeah, we can do this. It's easy, but should we? You know, I don't know. That's about it. So for my final thing, I want to end with a quote from the same sadhana. I think it's very relevant to the Scholar-Practitioner. It said, may there be the auspiciousness of the venerable guru's holy form, remaining like an immutable Vajra in this world. I hope we all continue to have the good karma, to have amazing teachers, scholar practitioners who can guide us as we answer these questions for ourselves and for the community. Because without the Lama, without the guru, without good teachers here at this university, there will be people who will answer these questions for the community. Like it will get out. And do we want that? Do we want imperfect teachings on emptiness going out? I don't know. It's going to happen. So do we get involved even if we're breaking our secret mantra and bodhisattva vows just to make it so it's not worse? I don't have the answers for that, but that's why we need the teachers, the scholar practitioners to help guide us as we make these decisions. And so again, I'll conclude with basically saying thank you. There is a paper. There's a huge code repository if you want to look at the Python that we use to build these types of things. And there's a glossary with examples because I know I threw a lot of jargon at you and no one likes jargon that they don't, especially acronyms. Those are the worst. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much, Matt. So our final speaker today is Ngawang Trinley, who co-founded Isukya in 2009. For all of you Tibetan language students out there, you know what that is. And he's the director of the branch in India and serves on the board of directors. He has also proofread and edited the digital edition of the Dege Kangya for 84,000. Ngawang works for Buddhist Digital Resource Center as the digitization project manager, where he's in charge of digitizing texts, scans, and e-texts, and creating and maintaining relationships with users and partners. He's also the creator of translation tools, including a real-time collaborative online environment for translation work, proofreading software, and a Tibetan language spell checker. He happens to also be an advisor for RYI's translator training program syllabus and the translation memory development. So please join me in welcoming Ngawang.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for coming here. I think it's really inspiring to see so many people gathering from the AI side and Buddhist side. And so, yeah, actually these days my main job. So I'm not a scholar. I'm not an academic. Not even like a data scientist or AI scientist. But my day job for the past 2 years, has been actually building data sets, to train AI models, machine translation, OCR, speech to text, and, from beginning of this year, also LLMs. And so I'm from October 2022, I'm the co-founder and technical director of Moderator, who has been, working very closely with the team in Berkeley that's behind Dharma Mitra. So we've been, providing them with a lot of training data, and we have a whole team of Tibetan AI, developers, data scientists. I run like 50, Tibetan developers, and we have around 300 data annotators, or people who are basically preparing, collecting, cleansing, annotating, enriching, all these data sets to train AI models. That's it. So, so today my talk is called like Wisdom, Braids, and CSVs. So I'll start with, wisdom first. Basically, Thomas Doctor, actually, when he invited me to come to talk here, told me it has to be about Tosam Gomsum in the age of AI. And so, here, Tobe Sherab, Sambe Sherab, Gombe Sherab, so 3 types of wisdoms. And so I've been actually, thinking about, how can AI, contribute, for us to acquire these 3 different types of wisdoms. And so, of course, another way to divide these is, Lungi Tempa, Tobe Tempa, She Drup. And in the Tibetan tradition, actually, there's an interesting, thing with the first of these 3 wisdoms, Tebe Sherab, which is often called Yarme Sherab. So it's a Sherab actually that you borrow from others. It's not a wisdom that comes, from yourself. Sambe Sherab, in the other hand, is the next step when you borrowed wisdom from others, and then Rangi Nyebe Sherab, or Rangi Goas, your personal comprehension of what you heard, from others. And the last one is really about, experience, Rangi Nyoa. And so, when looking at, these 3 different wisdoms, from this perspective, then, Tabe Sherab kind of feels like, it could come from a book, a person, or why not an AI chatbot or model. And so, at least, for myself and my colleagues, we feel like a lot more comfortable in building tools, with AI models, chatbot, RAG systems, that will help, or that will make, the acquisition of this first wisdom, Tabe Sherab, much easier and faster. So a question I've been, wondering, thinking about, for, quite a few years is, okay, so what is the process of acquiring, wisdom and knowledge? And I've been, looking at the more, modern theories on how learning happens. And so I guess like a lot of you will be familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, where, you start learning, basically starts by remembering, understanding, applying, and analyzing, evaluating, creating. So you have like the higher levels and the lower, types of intelligence, basically. And, when we think about Tosam Gom, it actually maps, very well with, the lower level. So Toba, basically remembering, information you got from others. So it's like the borrowed wisdom. Then you have understanding, Samba, and Gomba, applying that in different contexts or in your life or whatever, or hopefully in your practice and, meditation. And we can also, look at Che Tso Tsom Sum. Actually, they also kind of map with the higher levels. Anyway, and so with this in mind, so actually what did technology, do to education in general? So that's the next question, that came to me. And so something that was for me like really interesting, to find out is the concept of education 4.0. And so that basically, the World Economic Forum, who is, like tracking the different trends in education, in the workforce, and, different, how the world is changing and how to prepare the next generations, to be able like to live in a world, with or to coexist, together with AI. And so they came up with, a lot of different recommendations and guidelines. And a very interesting trend is that knowledge and information the acquisition of knowledge and information kind of fell very low in terms of priority in what, the education of the next generations, of kids, should be. So they're ready to, be part of the world, yeah. And the focus now is really on skills and attitudes or values. And so here you see the two top, parts are actually what I, now is recommended, to focus on, as educators or, students. And so another way to look at it is basically, so the traditional side, so the pyramid, of the Bloom taxonomy I just showed, starts with remember that was a lot of, the major part of what education is. If you think about, probably all of you, when you went to school, you would get a lot of information from the class, from the teacher. And then the teacher will give you some exercise, etc., to try to, or discuss it to try to make sure that you understand it. And then you get some homework, which is supposed to be the apply, analyze, evaluate, and create, phase. Which, if you just think in terms of time, actually you spend a lot more time with remembering, understanding, and a little bit on the other, phases. And so this is very much true for the Tibetan education system, in monasteries or wherever, where the major part of the, the education is actually memorizing. I've studied, several years, in Shedras, and a lot of the, explanations that happen are actually, explanation of words, etc. Yeah. So now what technology did to education is that nowadays, actually just information, the acquisition of information is not as important and as relevant as it used to be. Because anyone can, Google anything, you have Wikipedia, you have so basically just like remembering and just like acquiring information is actually not that important anymore, because we have like kind of extended our brains with phones, with with papers. It was already starting, but now it's, multiplied by, a lot. And so now in modern education, basically all the, people who design curriculums and teachers and teacher trainers, they try to make sure that actually just a little bit of time, so on the, right side, a little bit of time and effort is put on remembering, understanding, and a lot more is put in actually practicing. Yeah. And so, I mean, this is just like general education theories and general trends in which education is going. And so I think it might be, the question is, okay, does that apply to Telsam Gongsun? And probably yes. And hopefully, yes, I would say, because I think we should be, spending more time looking at our minds rather than trying to, find what is the right spelling and, in 50 different manuscripts, from 1,000 years ago. So I think actually what AI and, technology will bring is that we'll need less time and put less effort on Te, less on Sam and more on Gom. Yeah. So that was my first topic. So my second topic is bread. So I'm French. So, I like to have my baguettes and croissants. So bread is very important, for me. And so, as I mentioned, earlier, so I'm kind of like, running different projects that are building, AI tools and training data sets, etc. So I have to think a lot about actually what does it mean in the world of like, Buddhist practitioners, studies, etc. And one of the things that helped me the most recently is actually thinking about, all this process, as a supply chain. And so this image here, actually it was drawn by a human. I paid for, the work. Anyway, and so this image really helped me a lot to prioritize, where we put, resources and, effort. And so if you think about, okay, so I guess it's kind of like, self-explanatory. So to go from, the field where grain to a shop that sells, croissants or chapatis. So you have like all these different steps. And, working with BDRC, I remember, many times a big tension is, okay, so we need more funding. We don't have enough funding. And when talking to funders like, yeah, but you don't have enough impact. Yeah. Same thing for translation. So, 15, 20 years ago, so I started, this online school, Esugya. So my goal was to help, my hope was to help translators to speak better Tibetan so they can work, with Tibetan, teachers and, realized, masters in a similar model to the Pendita, Lotsawa, kind of like a collaborative, setup. And again, the same thing, not funding. People are not really interested. There's not enough like, impact. So that we keep hearing. And a few months ago, I was discussing with Jen Ronis, the head of, BDRC. And he told me, yeah, I just spoke with, like the head of, one of the foundations who works, who sponsors, the work of BDRC. And told me, yeah, they don't seem to be really satisfied with what we do somehow. And he said, I really don't understand because, like I just, shared with her that I found this very rare manuscript, from Lochen. Anyway, from, like it was a 800 years old manuscript. And he was saying, like, I share, that was, such a great discovery. And I don't understand why they don't get, excited about it. Yeah. And so at the time, actually, I had this image, on hand. And I told him, okay, so actually for me, BDRC basically is the higher, okay, the level number one on top. So gathering images, scanning them, cataloging them, and shipping them. Yeah. And so foundations, especially Buddhist foundations, they're interested in impact in the life of, practitioners and people studying, Buddhism. So they're kind of like, at the other end, at the bottom, near the shop. And so I tell him when listening to him, the image that came to mind is that you have like, the head of this foundation who comes and has like, thousands of hungry people to cater. And, some of them want baguette, some of them want, chapatis, anyway. And so she comes, to talk to Jen, and who has like, this very like 2000 years old amphora with, 2 pounds of grains found in a pyramid. And so he's really excited about it. But then she's like, okay, I have to feed, thousands of people. And so there's like a big, like, communication gap or understanding of what actually we each are doing in this supply chain. So same thing for translations. So I met and I talked with some of the people at Sadra, I guess like a lot of you I've worked with them, or maybe I've been sponsored, by them to do translations. And so again, same complaint. So, oh, we put so much effort in producing translations, and we don't have an audience. People are not that interested in that. And so back to, this. So my take is that a translation is like, raw dough. So the end of level 2. Yeah. So it's great, it's there, but basically not that many people are going to buy raw dough to go and cook their own bread. Same thing for the grain. Maybe you'll have like, some hippies in in the East Coast in California, or maybe, some German, like, traditional integrists or whatever, who are going to actually buy grain, and they're going to have like, their hand-stone meal, to make their flour, and they're going to bake their own, sourdough, bread. So yeah, for me, that's the philologist, community. Anyway, so there is a market, of people. There are some people who are going to go and buy, raw grain, but actually it's still very limited, and definitely it's not enough, for foundations to be interested in, funding all of this. So anyway, so the level 3, for me, is really where there's the biggest gap in the Buddhist world. So, the phase where we take some raw dough, like translations, and basically shape that dough in chapatis, in croissants, cakes, bagels, whatever, cook them and actually package them in a way that is going to be relevant, for, the, wide market. And the packaging at the end also, like on the lower level, is very important. And yeah, one thing that actually should be added is, basically having like the experience of a community. So like when you go to a Starbucks, you kind of, that's, they build their business model on having a kind of like community of coffee drinkers. Yeah. And so this feeling, and yeah, so basically this is also something I think that we could do a lot better on. So that's, yeah, for the bread. So, I'm probably one of the Buddhists who has the biggest number of Christian, Jewish, and, Korean apps on their phone. I do try to track, what's happening, in the other, communities. And so one of the websites I've been, looking at is called Sepharia. And so there, the Jewish community, the total population of Jewish, people is 14 million. Out of 14 million, they have 1 million people, monthly users, who on a monthly basis go and study, the scriptures on their website. Yeah. And so I actually reached out to them. And I'm okay, well, how did you do that? How do you get nearly 1/10 of your total population to come on your website and study, like ancient text? Yeah. And how do you fund that? That was a question I asked them too. And so they told me, yeah, actually our annual budget is 9 million. Out of this, 1 million comes, from just like, $5-10 donations. So it really doesn't seem to be a big issue for them, to do that. So they have actually what they told me is that, one of the main reasons why it works so well is that they build the platform as a community, as a place, for people to come and, exchange on these topics. Another, app on my phone, it's called Bible.com, your version. They have 12 million daily users, not monthly. Yeah. And so again, it's the same thing. They really shaped, baked, and, packaged, the content from all the Christian scriptures into, things that are really relevant and really have an impact, on everyday life of, their community. And as a side project, the Bible.com, your version organization, they build like, these translation tools. So this is the Bible, the tool, to translate Bible into Tibetan. And they have 10,000, 11,000, like nearly 12,000 active translators who are translating the Bible, in 3,500 languages. Yeah. And so this is all possible because they have a 12 million daily user base. Yeah. So that's just, something I wanted to share. It helped me a lot. It still helps me a lot, to decide, what to prioritize, how to work, etc. So I thought it might be useful for some of you too. And the third topic is CSVs. So probably, most of you must know what a CSV is. This like weird file format that you have to sometimes to use, out of Excel or whatever. And basically, this is the reality of my day-to-day job. So we do train models, we collect like a lot of data, but 80% of the work is actually doing data processing, cleaning, converting, and when you have like 300 people, you have to do a lot of management, quality control, etc., etc. Okay, so I'm just going to. Okay, maybe I'll go through this very quick. So actually in 2015, we started to get involved with, machine translation, AI, etc. We estimated we would need 100 translators to work for 10 years to get enough data to train a proper, Google Translate level kind of model. And so we looked for funding and support, but of course, it's not an easy ask. 2017, so there was this Colorado, conference. That's when actually H4000 started to do alignment. We pitched, me and some of my colleagues pitched CAT tools. And so from there, they started to align data, which then became very useful in 2022. Probably some of you saw this article on Edge Buddhism that kind of like started stirred up a lot of emotions. So my colleague, Sebastian Nerdig, actually, he found a way to automatically align sentences. And so this is where the Buddhist, machine translation world, kind of like exploded. And so at that time I tried to hire him, but Kurt Kuser from Berkeley was faster than me. And so in 22 in October, so we've, my colleague and co-founder, Geshe Manlam. So we actually set up Moderator and hired several hundred people. We decided, okay, so that's the team there. And some of you actually, I think, are in the pictures, some of you in the audience. Manlam has like compiled this 200 volumes dictionary. Maybe some of you are familiar with. Anyway, so we hired a few hundred people and we started to catalog all existing Tibetan English translations. Then we try to identify the Tibetan sources, add metadata, etc. And, collect, scan, OCR, clean, convert files, for all different languages, split them into sentences, run them through this, Vectorline pipeline, and then get, some humans to do quality control. Yeah. And so then we trained, different types of models. So NNLB, MATLAB, and now we're mainly focusing on GEMA 2. That's it. And this is actually what the models and the data that is behind the Moderator and the Mitra tool. Okay, so now we have like collected 5.4 billion tokens, of Tibetan, and we're training, LLMs and starting to work on, more different applications. And so, what I had left actually is very similar to, what you just presented. So now we're also looking into RAG systems, and how to ground translations into commentaries and real data, to make sure that actually the models can justify their choices when doing translation. That's it. So finally, so my take at this stage, for what it's worth, is that I think for Tabe Sherab, Sambe Sherab, AI can help a big deal. And Gombe Sherab, personally, I don't really see, what it's going to do, but I'm really eager to hear more from Adam about this and discuss this more with him. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Well, okay, I'm going to try to make my remarks brief because I know we're running over time. It's me commenting on these papers is slightly peculiar. I'm going to be coming from a Buddhist studies perspective and from the perspective of somebody who's aspiring to the ideal of a scholar practitioner as articulated by the tradition. So that's where I stand on sort of my position in all of this. I'm woefully, I'm being educated as these talks are underway, and I've been around some of this stuff, but I'm not very knowledgeable about it. So this is I'm coming from a slightly different perspective on it, humanities perspective, I guess. So the three speakers gave a lot to ponder, obviously. Thank you very much for your papers, and I enjoyed thinking with them. I'll start with Adam's talk first. So this interrogation of the boundaries of artificiality and what exactly we mean by the artificial and artifice in artificial intelligence. Now, the chosen term for juxtaposition with that you have is the real or reality. And you claim that this sort of dichotomy or this dualistic kind of principle of sort of the real ones working on the artificial ones out there could benefit from conceptions of, in the paper, you have this notion of an extended self and aggregate theory, but you just mentioned here kind of emergent sentience, self-reflection, and something to do with aggregates. So really, I like this concept of drawing attention to the fuzziness of hard boundaries, presumably separating the computer systems from their designers and users. And you go on to show how AI design and use is in fact moving or has moved and it continues to move toward greater collaboration with its real human counterparts in ways that will continue to blur those boundaries even further, prompting us to question what was so real about the human in the first place, maybe. Or at least that's where my mind was going as you were speaking. So this is all very exciting and a little bit spooky, quite frankly, from my perspective. One question that came up for me as I listened to your talk, Adam, is if and how the discussion might shift if we juxtapose not the real to the artificial, but the natural to the artificial. I think this because many things to my mind can be both artificial and quite real, but it's often presumed that nothing can be both artificial and natural. And yet, to your point, Adam, when we look closely at the boundaries between the human and the technological, we see all around us artificial and natural things in hybrid entanglements pretty much everywhere. So, is there in fact anything in our experience, quite aside from AIs working with humans, that is not already some combination of artificially constructed and naturally occurring phenomena in some kind of entangled cooperation, you might ask. So in this, I'm inspired by the sociologist and historian of science, Bruno Latour's reflections on the nature of collective human action, as always consisting not of human agents acting alone on inert matter, but of networks of human and non-human actants. So he kind of dislocates agency and distributes it throughout these networks, linked together in complex arrangements of micro actions distributed to form larger trajectories of action where you don't really have discrete agents that are the humans, where agency is located within subjectivity solely. So Latour's vision of action really poses a challenge, I think, to the boundaries between the taken for granted dichotomies of nature, culture, nature, society, nature, technology, to propose that these divisions have in fact never truly pertained. And there has been hybridity all along, in fact, and it's not quite a new thing. Indeed. So seen in this light, perhaps the AI-human interconnection that Adam sees as an inevitable part of our future, or sort of an emergent part of our present, is in fact just a technological extension of the hybridity that has characterized human society since we first started to use tools, actually. In other words, is the AI move toward the real or the natural, and the AI-human entanglements and the hybridity this entails just an explication and an acceleration of what we have always been? So namely nature, culture, technology hybrids, or kind of cyborgs. And so to kind of twist Latour into this, have we ever been natural, truly, right? So that's just a question to pose, and we can kind of talk about that or move it into other directions as we will. But so now to Matt and Ngawang's talks on the multiple uses of AI in the creation, translation, and dissemination of the Buddhist teachings. I'm very grateful for the lucid explanations. I've been around this stuff for a while, and now I'm finally getting it thanks to you too. So so all of these things, the CPU to the GPU, the NLP, the NMT, the LLMs, all these kind of acronyms, these funky acronyms, I'm really grateful to have a handle on them finally. So I really appreciate that. So, but my main question with all of this is what actually will happen to human knowledge along the way? What's going to happen in the long run? Really in the long run? Because I love these tools. I find them very interesting and we'll probably use them. But will these developments in the long run erase human knowledge or actually enhance it? The picture painted is very optimistic, extraordinarily optimistic, I would say. Although there was some caution in your voices, I could sort of sense. And this optimism is really shared by some of my colleagues in Buddhist studies, but many other colleagues in Buddhist studies, and I have to include myself in this, worry that people will eventually no longer be interested in training in classical languages, Tibetan, Chinese, Sanskrit, Pali, and so forth, that the Tusam will just be kind of left by the wayside, as Ngawang so clearly explained. But, you know, often when I express this concern to my engineering friends and the people sort of on your side of things, they sort of laugh it off and say, oh, it's going to help us. It's going to help us. You know, they always try to assure me that it's going to help us and not sort of replace us or sort of eliminate the drive to study, actually. But one crucial aspect of learning to read Buddhist texts in their original language, for me, is the pleasure, the satisfaction, and the meaning you derive on a personal level, actually. So reading Buddhist texts in Tibetan with teachers speaking in Tibetan medium and comprehending it has been really one of the most fulfilling and transformational aspects of my life, really to the point where it's veering toward the Gom, you know. It's sort of, can it be pried away from Gom, actually, Gombe Sherab? Can Te Sam really be sort of taken out of the picture and we just go straight to the Gom? Or do we need that process? Is that part of it? So for me, the language has never been just a means toward the end of having the text in my own native language, actually. It has been about having a prolonged encounter with the ideas in the medium of their original linguistic medium of expression and being enriched in the process. So in this sense, for me, language and textual studies have been an integral part of the Buddhist practice. So just as they have for many others over the centuries, and not just a sort of means toward, but actually part of the development process, part of cultivation. So with that said, will these advances truly broaden the scope of Buddhist studies, as Matt wrote in his paper, or will they eventually bring about the end of not only Buddhist studies, but Buddhist textually based contemplative practice altogether, actually? The same goes for these LLMs. Would this effectively create the impression that living teachers are no longer necessary and bring an end to lineages? These are questions that have already been brought up before. Or would it create new lineages of hybrid AI human configurations where you're, you know, there might be links there. So I very much appreciate Matt's cautious tone about ethical guardrails, but I'm just not sure human teachers will be consulted for critical review of AI-generated teachings once the sociology of knowledge has been so thoroughly transformed through prolonged use of these technologies that student-teacher interfaces are basically rendered obsolete. So I just wonder if that's something we can even kind of prevent eventually. So in the same vein, there's also something deeply meaningful as a Buddhist practitioner about learning the particular style of writing, speaking, and thinking of a great Buddhist teacher from the past or present in their own words. So to me, this involves a process of kind of deep learning and discovery that's simply just asking an AI what such and such luminary had to say about this or that issue would replace. that whole process of coming to that knowledge. So the RAG systems is what I'm talking about here. I can't help but wonder, with this and many other of the tools, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should. So to your question. So I'm going to try to finish up here quicker. But the deeper problem to me, as I see it, is the whole issue of accuracy or fidelity in machine translation. And what I see is an overemphasis on a very uncomplicated notion of accuracy and equivalence as the main gauge of successful AI translation. So for one thing, what kind of equivalence is being sought here, right? What do we mean by equivalence? And so what comes to mind is the biblical translator and translation theorist Eugene Nida, who many of you in the translation studies program might know, who proposed that we distinguish between formal word-for-word equivalence and a kind of functional equivalence in which the translated message has an equivalent impact on its target language audience as the source language message had on its audience. So, but how do you measure this exactly? And yet, without some degree of equivalent impact, how can we speak of the transmission of Buddhist concepts, actually? The whole focus on accuracy in whatever form also seems to imply a very static sort of container transport model of translation and language, in which meaning is related to particular languages as contents are to their containers, such that in the process of translation, we are simply kind of moving content, meaning, from one language to another, rather than transforming it in the process. So this, to me, is a very limited view of language, its relationship to meaning, and what actually takes place in the process of understanding and translation. I mean, to me, a language is a world, essentially, and you inhabit that world. And translation is a very messy business where you're moving between worlds, essentially. So it seems to presume also that the formal features like literary style, which of course can vary from language to language, writer to writer, translator to translator, are just extrinsic or ancillary to meaning. So nothing to do with it necessarily. So on the optimistic side, so I've just given a dim sort of indictment of the whole enterprise a little bit. So, but just to be optimistic, I love these tools. I will continue to use these tools. And they have been used in Buddhist studies in quite transformative ways. So there's a project founded by Dr. Pascal Hugon. It's an ERC-funded project called The Dawn of Tibetan Buddhist Scholasticism from the 11th to the 13th century, where her team is utilizing OCR tools to convert a massive collection of Kadampa scholastic texts written in Tibetan cursive script into digital format, and enlisting other AI tools to kind of map networks of teachers, students, and locations of study, and so forth and so on. And there's other projects also underway that really do expand the scope of what's possible in Buddhist studies and enable us to deal with a multi-text corpora in quite interesting ways. But at the end of it all, will there be anyone left who will read the Buddhist languages and engage in their learning and teaching as a mode of practice worthy of its own endeavor, as has been the case traditionally? Will it do away with the prolonged and deep study of the Buddhist scriptures? Anyway, these are my larger questions, so I just want to open it up now, if we have any time left. Thanks.
It came to mind when you were talking about what you were just both discussing, that if we take someone with a prosthetic leg, there's nothing natural about that. But I think if we were to say that that is not a leg, I think they might take offense and go, actually, that is a leg. It gives me the ability to walk, and I can run with it, I can jump with it. And so some of the things that you were saying, I'd never thought before, but maybe AI is just an extension of that. It's like prosthetic mind, and we're using it to do things. And so to say that that's not an extension of our mind, that's not any different than the prosthetic leg, I wonder, I hadn't thought of it before. I have to chew on that a little bit, but it did give me something to chew on. I think the other thing that is the Buddha Dharma going to degrade even further and become even less, I don't know, accessible or used? I think as a practitioner who has a very single pointed end to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. I simply want to use the technology to get out as quickly as I can for all the benefit of all. And so I think so many things within Buddhism are degrading quicker than I can even see. And I would hate to see Buddhism, Buddha Dharma extinguished from this world system. But I think if in any way it can quicken people's access to technology, and I don't mean AI technology, but like tantric technology, then I think we need to use it, because I fear in dark times. And I would hate to see the Buddha Dharma, just like the printing press, like I think the printing press has made it so now we can get Buddha Dharma books and print out to more people. And I speculate that AI will do the same. But I hear all the points you make about the language. I bet there will be fewer people studying Tibetan, but I think if we were to graph that, are there fewer people studying Sanskrit and Tibetan even before AI was common? Is it an exponential downward slope? I don't know. I speculate that it is. And so maybe like if we were to build a large language model in Tibetan and people would actually need to engage with that, would there be a resurgence, actually an interest in learning? Imagine if you had a chat GPT that was taking the 29 million pages that BDRC had, and you can ask it questions, spiritual questions. You could actually say, I want it in this lineage. According to the lineage of this person, how do I enter, make progress, and complete the spiritual path? And here's what's going on in my life. And what do you recommend? Like, when should I meditate and how long? And how do I deal with this delusion? And, that model will answer that. I'm not saying it'll answer it correctly, but I don't know. You ask some really good questions that I don't have answers for, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I guess I'm more of the school of, if we can do it, should we do it? I'm more of the school of people who would answer, yes, we should do it. Anyway, so yeah, actually listening to, what you were saying, it made me think of an image that Donzar Khyentse Rinpoche, gave in a talk a couple of years ago in Taiwan that helped me a lot. And which is, he was saying, okay, so basically we have to think about, Buddhists as a pyramid. So right on top of the pyramid, you have like the Shedrup Niden Ganza, you have like all the realized and scholars, etc. And then under there, you have like, some good practitioners, or you have like, Khenpos and Geshes, maybe are not completely realized yet. And then you have like lesser quality Khenpos and Geshes, monks in Shedras, monks in monasteries, lay people who are just interested, etc. And when you go down the pyramid, actually you get to very bad quality Buddhists, shitty Buddhists, basically. And so Buddhists were, they are interested in Buddhism. They think, many things about, energies coming from this and that, and a lot of like weird, things, but they're a type of Buddhist. And so his, take on this was that, okay, so we are all focusing on the high quality, low quantity, top of the pyramid. And so we should actually, look at the basis of pyramid. We need a lot of shitty Buddhists in order to get high quality Shedrup Niden Kanza. That's it. So, and actually coming back to, this Sepharia website, when talking to the people who built it, so it's basically a Jewish, startup. And so they were saying actually what really bring a lot of people on their platform is that they have different versions of the scriptures adapted to different, types of audience. Yeah. And so you have, the translation, just like the Bible. If you think you take the Bible in English, it has more than 400 different English translations. You have Bible for kids, Bible for teenagers, Bible for poets, Bible for philologists, Bible for, anyone. And so basically, I think actually, that's, changing the style or adapting, text to a new style is actually one of the things that LLMs do the best. And so actually, I think if I see a lot of value. I did actually some, initial, surveys in the Tibetan communities, and there is a lot of value in having, in parallel. So the original Tibetan, original Sanskrit, like literal translations, but also everyday language, plain language, kind of adaptations. And so this is actually what is going to, bring, a larger audience, which, creates like this huge pool from which, people who actually are going to study Tibetan, are going to study Sanskrit, etc., is going to come from. So I think actually if we can, try to think, in this kind of like, with this kind of perspective, I think there's no reason why we can't have, 12 million daily users, on, Buddhist platforms. We're really far from that. I did some, research on that. We're like, not even in hundreds of thousands, for 84,000 and etc. Yeah. So, yeah.
That's all really encouraging. Thank you very much for that response to kind of allay my pessimism. That's very nice, and thanks for your responses too. Really interesting to think through. And I mean, to the point of the popularity of the Tibetan language, I was just in China, and where all kinds of AI tools are being implemented, and the study of classical Tibetan is just exploding. I've heard. I mean, that's what people are telling me there with online courses. And it seems that the AI learning tools are actually encouraging the kind of engagement with classical Tibetan. So that's another, sort of a piece of evidence to your point. So these are just some of the concerns I've had over the years. But do we have time to open it, or we're dead? Okay, everyone's hungry probably and tired. Okay, well, anyways, thank you so much for such great talks, and thank you for coming to the panel and listening so attentively.